Hello friends, Shaggy from Scooby-Doo here, bringing you another Dota 2 video on behalf of Dota Alchemy, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at a replay of VP versus Royal Never Give Up, part of MDL Macau, and this was actually a request from Jeed in Boston, one of our Philosopher's Stone tier Patreon subscribers, and he said, I want to learn Lifestealer or another carry safe lane against Razor. I think Razor is an excellent counter to a lot of the carries right now. This is me saying this, by the way. He didn't say this part. And I think that this is a perfectly valid thing to want to know how to deal with. And here we have a game from the Major where Monet went 12-0-12 versus a Razor. So I think this will be a really good replay to look at and analyze and see how to play against this hero and how to dominate versus this hero. So here we are, 2 seconds before the bounty runes have spawned, and the game basically hasn't started yet, and we have arguably our most important tidbit of information about this matchup of Razor versus Lifestealer. So if you're RNG and you look at the VP draft, you can see that there's a roaming CK, it's Roger playing it. You can see that there's a Razor pick, Pasha's playing it, he's an offlaner. No one's playing the Dazzle. You have a Juggernaut who's typically a safe lane carry, so it's very likely given this draft that it's a Razor offlane. And even if it was a Razor carry, you could make a good argument that a Razor carry would want to lane into a Lifestealer and still function as a Razor carry. Basically, if you're in a pub and there's a Razor on the enemy team, if the enemy Razor is smart, they'll look to lane into you, and you can kind of assume that because it's that good of a lane. And as a result, we can see that here, Monet, who's playing Lifestealer, who's typically a safe laning hero, is starting in the off lane. And not only this, RNG has placed a deep ward in the enemy jungle, which is scouting the lane rotations. So this is something you can do in your pubs. You can place the ward, or you can request for which one of your supports is in the off lane to go and place this ward here quite easily. And watch what happens when Monet sees Ramses on Juggernaut running into vision. So he sees him running into vision, and if we go back to Lifestealer, he's kind of going back and forth, but then it looks like Jug runs back to the lane, and he's going to go safe lane, potentially. And so, as a result, Monet is running back into the lane, and then when he sees Juggernaut with this ward running towards top, Monet starts running towards top. So the reason that they're running to try to have the Lifestealer laning against the Juggernaut and not TPing is because, well, essentially, if one of them TPs, then the other one TPs, and then TP is on cooldown for 80 seconds, and then essentially whoever TP'd first is going to have the shitty lane. Like, they're going to have the lane that they don't want, and they're going to be stuck with that, and if they want to swap the lanes again, they have to walk anyway. So essentially, both teams are forced to just walk between the lanes with supports taking the experience in the side lanes. And this actually benefits Lifestealer because, of course, if Lifestealer lanes against the Razor, he's going to get decimated anyway, so he may as well just allow the supports to get the experience in the side lanes, and he can walk to the lanes to get that good laning setup. But also, Lifestealer is a 330 movement speed hero, Jug is a 300 movement speed hero, and Razor is a 290 movement speed hero. So Lifestealer is perfectly okay with swapping between the lanes like this, whereas a lot of other heroes aren't. So if you're Lifestealer and you don't want to lane against a Razor, don't do it. So we hit a certain point in the game where VP realizes, alright guys, we picked the Razor to lane against the Lifestealer, these lanes aren't going great, so they rotate the Razor towards the Lifestealer, and what does Monet do? He runs away as the Razor runs up to him and starts draining him of his damage. And then, as soon as he gets in the tower and he's not going to get his TP canceled, he TPs to the bot lane. Like, this is a really important concept in my opinion because I see this screwed up a lot in pubs where a lot of the time people will get the early lanes correct and they'll make the correct rotations, but at a certain point people kind of get like lazy or complacent where it's like, well, you know, I'm Lifestealer, I have some levels, now the Razor's against me, it's not that big of a deal. No, screw that. Like, you want to have an amazing game if you're playing carry, especially a hero that's as beastly as Lifestealer. You don't want to just be complacent and have the Razor, who is having a pretty poor game, all of a sudden have a great game, and then you have a bad game even though you were having a great game already, like when you can just simply TP to another lane. In terms of his early item build this game, Monet went for Phase Boots, Midas Rush with a Magic Wand, Quelling Blade. The Quelling Blade is, of course, due to the fact that he's a carry. The Magic Wand is because there's a lot of fighting going on in this game, and it just felt like a good game for that, as we can see here. Lots of fighting. VP was being very active. RNG were okay with being very active, so they wanted to fight with the Magic Wand Stout Shield because no melee hero goes without a Stout Shield, and the Midas. So he rushes Midas and goes for phase boots. Other people might go for treads on Lifestealer. I personally would go phase boots every time, but I'm a believer that phase boots are just ubiquitously broken on any melee hero. Some people go for brown boots into Midas, into Radiance, but I would argue that most people, even the treads lovers, would go for phase boots in this game for a couple of reasons. Essentially, VP are tons of physical damage. Dazzle's physical, Razor's physical, CK has all the illusions, Jug has Omni Slash, which is physical. So the armor that the phase boots give you is amazing in this game. And then also, Lifestealer is a hero who has high base movement speed. So if you use the phase and get the 22% extra increased movement speed, that is based on his base movement speed. So he gets more out of that phase speed than other heroes in Dota because his base movement speed is very high. And essentially that's going to help him escape these heroes. Like Razor is going to static link him, Chaos Knight who might spawn the illusions. Like they don't have much in the way of catching Monet unless they just run him down. So the phase boots are just so good in this game, and after that he can just build into the Radiance and be that late game beast. After the laning stage breaks down and there are no longer really lanes, essentially what Monet does is he goes through a rotation of sitting in the lane and hitting every single creep until he pushes it out, and then when the lane is pushed into an unsafe position, he jungles. He pushes a lane, he jungles. He pushes a lane, he jungles. And he does this until he gets his Radiance. And the reason that he does this is because pushing the lane forces somebody to show up at that lane and deal with it. As we can see, the Juggernaut is in that lane. Now that the lane is back to his tower, he's probably going to walk over after this camp and deal with it. But this rotation is going to keep him safe. It's going to allow him to free farm, but he's not going to be completely useless and just sacrificing his team and sacrificing his towers. Even though they're fighting, potentially they might die. Who knows? They might kill the enemy team. It doesn't matter. He's not showing up to fights, but he's still being useless by pushing waves. But he's pushing the waves and jungling, so that way he's safe, and then he's going to get twice the amount of farm because he's pushing the wave, which is getting him the wave farm, and then he's jungling. So you might think, because Monet was just ignoring his team and letting them all fight and totally not showing up to team fights or anything like that, that he's going to hard farm his Radiance. But this actually isn't the case. Once he gets the Relic, which he just got, he starts farming near his team. It doesn't look like he necessarily wants to show up to fights. It's more so that instead of being in a completely space-taking position, he is more okay with showing up to fights if they're good. And I believe in this fight, they end up completely crushing VP and almost winning the game off of the back of this fight. And I thought that was pretty important to note as playing Lifestealer in general, just because you don't need the Radiance to fight, but if you're sitting on 3,000 gold and you don't have that Relic, then that's 3,000 gold. That's effectively nothing. I mean, it's just gold. It doesn't give you any extra damage, but once you pick up the Relic, sure, it's not the Radiance, but now you have 3,800 gold that isn't just sitting in your inventory. In Monet, his entire playstyle changes once he picks up that item. So next, we're going to talk about how to team fight against Razor as Lifestealer in this current patch. And speaking of this current patch, it looks like, given the games that I've seen in this tournament of Lifestealer versus Razor, there are two common approaches for dealing with Razor as a counter in team fights, and we're about to see both of them to some degree. So here we have RNG have 5 players up. They have 7k gold lead. VP have 2 heroes down. They're fighting to the shrine, which isn't a great spot to fight, but we can see Monet is pinging. He's spam pinging. He's saying, go, 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 go. There's 3 of them. We can wipe them here. And here's kind of the first method. So we can see that he gets linked by the Razor. Their team unloads all of their damage that they can get onto these heroes, and it just looks like it's not enough. So they anticipated that even though he was letting the static link drain his damage, that the Feast plus the Radiance plus the Coddle damage plus the Darkseer damage would be enough to kill these heroes. It was a bit of a miscalculation, and now with VP coming alive, at the very least on their Juggernaut, and fighting into their shrine, with the Lifestealer having 182 damage stolen, they respect that and they back off. It is a 7k gold lead, but they don't want to... They just don't want to take a fight that's potentially bad. They probably could fight it. Don't get me wrong. They probably could fight this, but it's more like, why not just fight later when the risk is a lot less? So respecting the fact that Static Link is essentially strong, and that's kind of the first way to play against Static Link. It's not really respecting it, but it's understanding that the enemy team is going to commit heavily when the Razor has Static Link the Lifestealer. At the very least, the Razor's going to commit. So you can essentially walk into a fight as Lifestealer, tell your team that they're going to commit to it, use your Rage, let your Radiance do damage, let your Feast do damage, and then tell your team, like, all right, you guys are going to do this damage. They're going to cluster up, and we're going to fight them. So you can use it essentially as a bait when you've gone for this build, because you have other damage other than just your right-click damage. And then we have this, and that has actually worked in this game. Like, I believe the game-ending fight, the Razor commits to the Lifestealer static link, Vacuum comes out, Queen of Pain ulti comes out, absolute obliteration on the side of VP. So it does force a committal when that static link comes out, and that's a way you can play against it. But here's the second way. So static link comes out on Lifestealer, and he immediately pops the phase boots and runs away. I believe they actually Yules him too. Afu Yules him. So you can build into these movement speed items. You can let your team know. It's like, okay, Dark's here. When he links me, you're going to surge me away. When he links me, you're going to Yules him. Like, you can communicate to your team and play in a way where you bait the static link and then go in. Where I see the mistakes being made in terms of pubs is when people are essentially just playing the Lifestealer into the Razor and you just commit. You just commit because it's a fight, and normally Lifestealers would commit. But against Razor, you have to commit and then dip, and then if it looks like the enemy team is still going to fight you and he hasn't stolen a lot of damage, then you go in. But it's not just as simple as just fighting. So it makes team fights a little bit more difficult to execute, but not that much more difficult to execute. It's still a really great hero, even against Razor. In terms of late game, Monet built into a Yasha and then went into a Lincoln Sphere before building into the full Sanjin Yasha, which is interesting in most games, but in this game, it makes a lot of sense. You get the movement speed of the casual Yasha versus the Razor, but then you need the Lincoln Sphere because you want that static link to not work on you. You cannot static link through Lincoln Sphere, and then eventually, because it's a good item, you build into the Sanjin Yasha, but at first, you have to worry about countering this Razor, countering this hard counter, and in fact, I would say that VP actually has 5 relatively hard counters to Monet. I thought Lifestealer was overrated. I thought Lifestealer would be awful if you countered him, and it looks like Monet begs to differ, and honestly, so do the tournament results of MDL. Lifestealer's getting banned a lot when it is picked. There's tons of counters picked against it, so the win rate is going to be a little bit lower due to that, but all in all, Lifestealer's looking like an absolute beast. It's just far more difficult to play in games like this, but Monet obviously is very capable. So thank you so much for requesting this video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you guys in another video.